Welcome to the World of Rare Disease, a show that focuses on awareness and education about rare and complex disorders. I am Lisa Deck, your host for today's show and a Rare New England committee member. Today, our show features Annette Hines. An attorney by trade, Annette Hines' life as she knew it exploded when her infant daughter, Elizabeth, was diagnosed with mitochondrial disease, a degenerative, life-limiting illness. Annette's joy quickly turned to apprehension, and she knew nothing would ever be the same again. Today, our show looks at Annette's role of dedicated mother and caregiver. I'm thrilled to welcome Annette to our show.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thank you for being here.
So happy to be here.
Yes, well, we are very fortunate. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Elizabeth and her early diagnosis and what that looked like for you.
Well, Elizabeth, I like to say, kind of burst onto the scene as a 29-week preemie, 2-pound baby. And I was in my late 20s, but had just finished up law school and just gotten married. So I felt like I was still pretty young, hadn't really gotten out into life yet. So it was, I think, a kind of my first real life experience. And I was really naive and not expecting that my first pregnancy or my birth experience was going to be like that. So I wasn't expecting, of course nobody is, to have a baby with such profound needs right off the bat. So It was quite an experience. And we went through a lot of trauma, but we did take her home after 9 weeks in the NICU and were told that she was fine. But she wasn't fine.
Right.
And it took a while to figure that out.
Right. So yes, when you talk about you thought she was fine and she wasn't fine, I think that is very common in chronic illness and rare diseases.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about Elizabeth and what she was like as a baby and how you came to discover that something wasn't right.
Well, really, my mom was the one. Isn't it always moms who figure these things out?
They have that special eye, right.
So Elizabeth wasn't meeting her milestones, but she was a preemie, so they just kept telling me not to worry. The doctors were telling me that I was just nervous, first mom, and they were kind of being very dismissive to me. And then my mom came for a visit because I didn't live in the same state that my mom was, and she really was not happy with what she was seeing and felt like this was not right, and felt very alerted, and said so to me, but then went back home, and then shortly thereafter Elizabeth started having seizures. And finally, even after that, the doctors were still dismissing it, even though I called them and they said, oh, it's just reflux. I finally brought her into the emergency room and she had a seizure right in front of them, and they were like, oh. Wow. And all of a sudden, yes.
Right.
Finally, they agreed that there was something going on.
Right.
So.
Oh, that's so challenging, though, that it needs to be seen. So from there, tell us a little bit about how things progressed.
Well, an advocate was born at that moment.
Right.
Because I finally realized that they didn't know everything, and I was going to need to become Elizabeth's expert, or the expert on the Elizabethness of Elizabeth. And that's really how our life began, because Elizabeth was very unique, and we discovered that over many years of being with her. So it took another 2 years. She started having seizures at 7 months, and after about 2 more years and flying down to Georgia to a specialist, we finally got her diagnosed. And thank you, Ronald McDonald House. That was so fun. They were so good to us.
Oh, good.
And we did finally get diagnosed at almost 3 years old, and got a mitochondrial disease diagnosis, which didn't help a lot in understanding what her trajectory of her disease was going to look like, but it helped with sort of symptoms and how to manage. Came back up to Boston and started, kind of working on each new symptom that popped up.
Right.
And Elizabeth was just Elizabeth. She was happy and beautiful and full of life, even though she was so sick and so challenged, but just a joy. She was my
Right.
joy, the love of my life.
So what are some of those symptoms? Can you give an example? Because I think some people watching have heard of mitochondrial disease but don't know what that looks like.
So it's very different for a lot of people with mito. It impacts people differently depending on the type that you have. So it's really hard. It's like saying somebody has autism and knowing what that means, or somebody has an intellectual disability and knowing what that means. So it is kind of hard to describe. But for Elizabeth, who was on the very far end and one of the most challenged folks, she was impacted in every system, unfortunately. She had pretty profound brain injury, and so she couldn't speak. She was blind, and she was in a wheelchair and didn't have a lot of use of her hands and arms, and she had seizures. But she could hear. We always joked, it was the one thing that worked. I hate to make fun, I know, but
No.
you have to laugh. I mean, you have
Yes.
to have joy and you have to
Yes.
laugh. And
Right.
but she was funny and sweet and charming and loved people and just drew people in, and had a lot of understanding of what was going on around her, and really did connect with people
Right.
a lot. She loved music. And so, but for her, with mitochondrial disease, when you get sick, your whole system crashes. So every time she would get sick, she would have a lot of difficulty. Her gut didn't work very well, so she had a G-tube, and eventually we couldn't even feed her through her stomach for a long time. So many of your listeners who have rare disease will understand when I say that there were so many systems that just didn't work.
Right.
And we just went from one healthcare crisis to the next, and we got all kinds of predictions about, oh, your child's not going to live, past 3. Oh, she's not going to live past XYZ. And then finally, they just stopped predicting because, they just couldn't
didn't
anymore.
know. Right. Yes. Wow. So you just touched upon the joy of Elizabeth, which has propelled you in your life and creating so many things. And you have also written a book about her and your journey with her. And we'll get to that in a minute. But talking about challenges, I mean, you mentioned them. Let's talk a little bit about even kind of the emotional challenges as a caregiver, and maybe, well, we'll go to that in a minute with siblings. I would love to touch upon both of those because I think those are topics that are very tough to deal with, and you've had to learn how to walk through that.
Yes. Well, as a caregiver, it's exhausting. And for me, I didn't have a good partner in my husband, so my marriage broke up pretty early. My younger daughter was only a year old when we split, and Elizabeth was 5. So it was really tough to raise those two alone. And of course, he was still present in their life, but it was challenging, and there were some dark days for sure. There were a lot of losses with a degenerative disease. So you get to solid ground, and then the next thing happens, and the next things happen. And so you're in a constant grieving process, and it can be really difficult to keep getting hammered. And so I think about it like getting pounded by the waves all the time. As soon as you stand up, another one hits you. And so it can be tough to go through that constantly and keep smiling for your kids all the time.
Well, somehow you have done it, because you are sitting here today, and Elizabeth's legacy lives on in you and with the different things you have created. Let's talk a little bit about Caroline.
Yeah. So Caroline, it's really difficult as a parent not to forget about the typical kid, because your sick kid just takes up so much of your time and energy. And even if you have two healthy parents who are going at it, you know, it's even more than you can bear. So many of my friends tell me, but when there's just one of you, there's not enough of you to go around. Even if you have nursing care, even if you have help, it's just overwhelming all the time. And the obligations that you have to work and so many things. I mean, I just always felt like I was the mom who was just one step away from DCF coming to sweep up her kids, constantly late for everything, you know, the one whose kid was always waiting because the mom was late, and, you know, it was just like always forever, you know.
Well, I mean, I think your life is a constant putting out fires. I mean, constantly, like you said, I mean, you're getting hammered, and you have no choice but to react to that. But then there's still the other sibling. And so I think you have talked about how that's something you recognize now, and you are proactive about trying to help others.
Yes. And then there's the self-care moments of, like, when do you take care of yourself?
Oh, what about that?
But for Caroline, I had a real aha moment with her when she was about 6 years old that I really like to tell people about, because I hope that people will learn from my mistakes and that I was changing Elizabeth and getting her ready for the day, which took a long time. And it was on a weekend when we didn't have help generally. And Caroline looked up at me and asked me when was she going to have to change Elizabeth's diaper. And she was so little. And it just floored me that she was already thinking about when was it going to be her responsibility to have to do all of this.
Wow.
And I just had this moment of, oh my goodness, Lisa, my poor baby is already, not only is she being, you know, abandoned by her mother as it is, but she's thinking about when is she going to have to do all of this work herself, you know. How heartbreaking for me. And I at that moment, I just vowed that Caroline was going to need to have not only mommy time, but her own life too. And how am I going to do this? So it wasn't perfect, but I did try after that to do separate things with Caroline, for Caroline to have her dance and for Caroline to have her whatever it was, horseback riding, and for Elizabeth to stay back with the nurse so I could do something with Caroline and go on little weekend trips to the Cape. And we have pictures of the first lobster, you know, and the this and the that. And again, it wasn't perfect, but I tried. And it was never enough for either of them.
Well, I think you can only give what you have, and it sounds like you did the. It sounds like the best you can was pretty darn good. So I think you have.
I don't know about that.
Right. Well, but you did the best you could.
And maybe we have to ask Caroline's therapist. I don't know,
right. Maybe she's the next guest.
She'll probably be in therapy until she's 50, but who knows?
Right. No, I mean, and I think that's an interesting perspective, is that illness, rare disease, it impacts everybody. You know, it's not just the patient, it's not just the parent, it's the sibling and the sibling's friends and your relationships. I mean, it compounds, and I think that's what part of our message as a rare disease community is yes, maybe there's only this many, but look how it impacts people.
Right.
And I think I want to mention your book because I'd like you to tell us about that in a minute, but I think that having the ability, passion, and willingness to share all of your feelings, dark, happy, joy, all of that is very brave. And I think that it helps others.
Well, thank you.
And I have yet to read it, and it's on my list, but I do know that I've read excerpts of it, and I think to be able to put it out there is very scary.
It is.
And I can only imagine how it makes you feel. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, honestly, when I hit that button and said, okay, you know, publish, I threw up a little bit. I'll be honest with you.
I can imagine.
It's not a happy book. It's not a like everything is rosy book and, you know, life was so good and I'm the awesomest mom on the planet book. So, you know, bring your tissues for sure. And I got comments about people who were mad at me, and there were points in there where they didn't like what I had to say. Okay, it's honest. It's an honest book. I spent a lot of time in my life just being mad about a lot of stuff because,
Understandably.
life wasn't great sometimes. But I started writing the book for myself, and about halfway through, I figured out this could really help somebody. And that's when I decided that I might turn it into something to publish. And I started writing it after Elizabeth died, not before. So that might clue you in as to why it's a little bit more raw than your average kind of feel-good book.
Right. But I think there's people out there who experience the same type of situation. And to hear that somebody else has walked it, survived it, and keeps going, as dark and as tough as that is, I think it's really important.
Yeah.
And I know that in the rare disease community, that is something that is very beneficial to everybody when you share those feelings, because I think everybody, you're either afraid of those feelings or they're happening to you or they might happen to you. And I think that it's part of it. And so I commend you for writing it, because I think that is not an easy task. I know I haven't gone there, so I know it's not an easy task. So tell me one final question, Elizabeth's legacy.
Yeah. Well, besides the book and doing the podcast, I've got my companies that I've started, Special Needs Law Group and Special Needs Family Services, which is the newest company. I really am out there in our community all over the country and just trying to share a message of peace and love and really just taking care of ourselves. That's all I want. I really just, as a community, I just want to make sure that people kind of get the fact that together we're stronger, and if I know something and you know something, then we know something. And so I know that our company, we are fee for service, but I've always tried to be a messenger for all the things that I've learned throughout this journey. And so that's why I do shows like this. I do a lot of free lectures. I do my free podcast, and I've got another book in the works. And I really want people to just kind of virtually hug each other and connect up. We're so strong together, and that's really all that I've been trying to say for about 20 years.
Right.
I'm paying it forward. So many people connected with me and helped me up when I just felt like I wasn't going to be able to walk anymore, and I didn't think I was going to make it. And I'm trying to do the same.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're doing it. One final question. I thought that was the last one, but where can people find out more about everything you're doing? What's the best way for them to learn about you, your companies, and everything that you have going on?
Well, the book is on Amazon and everywhere else you can buy a book.
And the title is?
Butterflies and Second Chances, which is so apropos because I got a second chance at life after Elizabeth passed. I wasn't sure I was going to have another life after that. And specialneedscompanies.com is where you can find out more about both companies and everything that we're doing, the podcast and all of the blogs and the writing that I do.
Wonderful. Well, I know we now have a new resource that our viewers can turn to, so thank you for sharing. I know it is not easy to relive some very tough times, but we appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Before closing, we provide our viewers with an opportunity to share comments or ask questions from our prior shows. Rare New England in Motion is the perfect way to expand upon our mission of engaging with our community. Please send us any questions or comments you may have to info@rarenewengland.org. We will share your responses on our next show. From our last show, we received a question from a guest. She is interested in learning more about being a geneticist and wonders if Rare New England can share some information. Fortunately, Rare New England recognizes that genetics impact every aspect of modern medicine and that there is a workforce shortage of geneticists in the United States. For those reasons, Rare New England hosts career fairs in medical genetics. These events allow medical students and young professionals to learn about careers in medical genetics. At these events, guests hear directly from physicians and scientists working in the field. Speakers include professionals in clinical genetics, biochemical genetics, and laboratory research genetics. You can learn more about these events on our website. Thank you so much for sending an inquiry. From all of us at Rare New England and all the patients and families who keep rare disease in motion, thank you for watching. And remember, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, then think zebras. Thank you.